There will probably be a few more people joining in the next few minutes, but I just want to get started so we can keep to our schedule. So yeah, welcome everyone. My name, in case you don't know me, is Elizabeth Smith. I am the Senior Mel Officer with the DEPP Learning Project. I work for Action Against Hunger UK, and I'm based here in London. So yeah, welcome to the learning series. This is week 5 of the learning series. And in case you've just popped in randomly to one of these webinars, the learning series is a series of webinars being held over 10 weeks, and it will be touching on topics related to humanitarian preparedness with a special focus on presenting tools for learning and for sharing learning. So the learning series is being run by the Learning Project, which is a project under the DFID-funded Disasters and Emergencies Preparedness Program. And we, as the Learning Project, are tasked with evidencing and sharing learning around what works and what doesn't work in humanitarian preparedness and in capacity building. So this week's session is on humanitarian collaboration. And if you want to find out anything more about the upcoming sessions, please feel free to go to our website. Our website is disasterpreparedness.ngo. And you can look at our website events page. And also, just while I'm on the website, I just want to mention that you can find a lot of good information about this theme, collaboration, and many other topics related to humanitarian preparedness in our learning library. You just have to go to our library and filter by theme, and you can find reports and case studies and blogs and a lot of information that people have posted from all over the world. So I'm just going to go through the session outline first. So for this webinar, there's going to be 3 presentations. The first one will be from me, and it's on collaboration enablers and blockers, trends from the DEPP. So these are kind of lessons learned around the enablers and blockers of collaboration, and also a few of the key outcomes that we've been seeing from the DEPP, which are hopefully also relevant to the wider humanitarian sector. Our second presentation will be on challenges and opportunities in partnering remotely, a collaboration toolbox. So this is a presentation from Roz Tennyson, the Partnership Brokers Association. So Roz and the PBA have been working closely with the DEPP, and as part of this collaboration with us, and as part of their Defying Distance project, they recently developed a toolbox for remote partnering, which is what Roz is going to present today. And finally, we will have a presentation from Alex Farrington from the Humanitarian Leadership Academy on creating humanitarian learning. So this will be around the HLA's collaboration model for creating humanitarian learning. And I believe Alex will be drawing on two particular case studies to illustrate this model, including one involving a DEPP project, the Transforming Surge Capacity Project. Just a couple of notes before I launch into my presentation. So this is about housekeeping. We really value your participation in these webinars. That being said, I'm going to mute everyone as they come online. So don't be offended if we mute you. And if you have any questions during the presentations, please feel free to type them into the chat. We're going to leave a couple of minutes after each presentation to do a kind of a Q&A. And if we don't manage to answer all of your questions at the end of each presentation, we'll hopefully have a little bit of time at the end to cover those, and also to have a little bit of a discussion where you can hopefully contribute some of your experiences and challenges and successes around collaboration. Another thing to mention, I have my colleague Alice is online. Her name in the chat you'll see is Alice, and in brackets, learning team. So if you have any problems with sound, any technical difficulties, please feel free to message her privately. And any questions for the speakers, just message the entire chat. So message everyone. Yeah, I think that is all. So I'll just get into my presentation first. So this is about collaboration enablers and blockers, trends coming from the DEPP Learning Project. I'm just going to go over a background of the DEPP for those of you who aren't familiar with the DEPP. The program is a humanitarian capacity building program. and it focuses on improving preparedness among local and national humanitarian actors. And the DEPP was designed to be highly collaborative in several ways. It is jointly implemented by the START and CDAC networks. It also involves 45 implementing agencies and over 100 local and national partners that are partnered with those implementing agencies. There are 14 projects in the program, and all of them are designed to be led in consortia. So that's 2 or more agencies working together to implement each project. So it's highly collaborative in nature, and this was absolutely designed on purpose. There was and is a lot of talk in the sector about agencies working in silos and not coordinating, especially around disaster response. So the goal in setting up these kinds of collaborative structures in the DEPP was to improve things like coordination and knowledge sharing, resource sharing in times of well, not crisis, so that when a crisis does arise, these structures are already set up and in place. So as the learning project, what do we have to do with collaboration and collaborative advantage? So we are tasked with evidencing this collaborative advantage or disadvantage. We are trying to find out what are some of the potentially positive and negative outcomes from humanitarian collaboration, what leads to a successful collaboration, and what can potentially hinder collaboration. So what we decided to do to try and find this out was develop an analysis tool, which is basically a survey where anyone involved in the program can submit their anecdotes or their stories about any type of collaborative activity that they've taken part in. So this is really open. This can be collaborations within a project, between projects, or with external stakeholders. And with this data, we're hoping to be able to get a general overview of the successes and the challenges associated with humanitarian collaboration, specifically around preparedness. So far, 83 anecdotes or stories have been submitted. One thing I should mention is a limitation that came up when we did a preliminary analysis of our survey results back in last November, I believe. We found out that the survey had been designed in a bit of a flawed way, so it didn't allow people to pinpoint challenges or hindering factors very easily. We were getting a lot of stories about successes, and people weren't so open about talking about the failures related to collaboration. But we've since redesigned the survey, and we've found that we've been getting a lot more quality data from that. But some of the results are still a little bit skewed because we need to collect more data with the redesigned survey. So this presentation today is just going to be very brief, and it's going to be on mostly the enablers and the blockers of collaboration. But I'm also going to be publishing a more detailed summary of the survey results, and that will be shared on our learning platform in the next couple of weeks. Okay. So what we found from our survey, we were able to identify a number of different enabling factors. So these are the factors that allow a collaboration to be successful or to be productive. So we identified 9 major areas, including collaboration human factor. I'm going to elaborate on that. Platforms for collaboration, resourcing for collaboration, a prospect of mutual benefit, so both parties benefit from the collaboration, trust or pre-existing relationships between people, a complementarity of project goals, having a clear structure for the collaboration, being in the same geographic location, so not having always to talk and plan and hold meetings remotely, and having supportive leadership, having the support of higher-ups. As you can see from this chart, so these are the number of times this factor was mentioned in a story. So almost half of the people said that this human factor was important for the success of their collaboration. And I'm just going to go over the top 3 enabling factors that came out and elaborate a little bit on those. And also you'll see that I've populated some of these slides with quotes. I'm not going to read the quotes, but you can have a look at them as I go through the slides. These are just little excerpts from the stories themselves that kind of highlight the different factors that have come up. So what do we mean by collaboration human factor? This is really about individual relationships between individual people. We often think about collaboration as this grand thing involving relationships between organizations, but in reality, these relationships between organizations often come down to the quality of the individual relationships between individual people in those organizations. And the most positive reports that we had from the stories that we looked at were from people who had positive experiences working with their collaborative partners on a personal level. And some of the attitudes that helped this were things just like general goodwill, an openness to share, an openness to collaborate, curiosity, and not being afraid to ask for help. Okay, one of the other major factors that came up in our analysis was that platforms for collaboration are really key to making a collaboration work. So when I say platforms, I don't necessarily mean online platforms, although they can be. These platforms can be online or in person, but what's important is that they are spaces where people can use to connect easily with each other, to share learning, to share information, to discuss and to plan. For the DEPP, it means participation in particular forums or events. For us, we have regular DEPP collaboration days where project leads can get together and discuss opportunities for collaboration amongst themselves. We also have country learning events and country learning hubs where people are connected with other projects in their country and can share their activities and plan for where they can do joint implementation and things like that. And also communicating via Skype platforms. It can be as simple or as basic as that. The third factor that I'm going to touch on, the third enabling factor, is resourcing for collaboration. So in this sector, everybody is very pressed for time and money, and people often just don't have the capacity to contribute their time to a collaboration. But we noticed from analyzing our stories that when organizations or individuals were able to set aside resources, either in the form of time to set up contracts, to engage in meetings, to plan for deliverables, as well as money to pay for people's time to do those things, or to pay for any other associated costs like joint implementation of activities or joint events, they were more likely to be successful. Okay, so on to some of the hindering factors or the blockers for collaboration. And these are things that might make collaborations less successful or a struggle. As you can see, there were fewer mentions of hindering factors as I talked about the problems with our survey initially, but we're starting to get a lot more interesting data around that. So some of the hindering factors, and you'll see that a lot of them are the flip side of the enabling factors, are things like time investment, not having established collaborative structures in place, a lack of resources, collaboration human factor, again, I'll elaborate on that a little bit, different organizational systems and processes, not having support of the leadership or higher ups, different geographic location or working remotely, although that wasn't always a hindering factor, one-sided collaboration, and not having any platforms available. So the number one blocking factor that came up was the time investment for collaboration. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so the time investment for collaboration. Collaboration takes time, especially in the initial stages. So things like setting up collaborations, setting up contracts, setting up MOUs, those initial planning meetings, getting buy-in from partners, follow-up, agreeing on deliverables, that all takes a lot of time. And it was mentioned again and again that that time was seen to be prohibitive. And also, especially in the initial stages, people underestimated the amount of time that it would take to set up the partnerships. Unfortunately, yeah, in the beginning of the DEPP, this meant a lot of delays, and that was a major hindering factor. Apologies, I'm slightly sick, so my voice is giving out a little bit. 1 minute. Okay, so the collaboration human factor. This is the flip side of the enabling factor that I mentioned before. When people are willing and cooperative, it can be very positive, but when relationships between individuals are strained, or when they're unwilling to compromise or unwilling to cooperate, or even sometimes a relationship just doesn't have to be negative, but if it's missing a personal element, so if you're always emailing with somebody and you've never met them in person, that can be a hindering factor. And these weaker or negative personal relationships could lead to a collaborative breakdown. And there were a couple of examples from our stories of this actually happening. And finally, different organizational systems and processes. So this was also something that came up in a learning report that we did in the spring. This was something that came up again and again as a major hindering factor for the sustainability of a collaboration or partnership. And we found that sometimes it was difficult for projects to establish successful ways of working with their partners because administrative processes between organizations could vary quite widely. And this could be seen particularly in the initial stages in establishing contracts and agreements. Okay, I'm just going to briefly go through some of the outcomes of collaboration in the DEPP. So we asked people to rate their perception of their collaboration, whether they thought it was successful or a positive experience or mixed. And we found that 81% of the stories thought that, or indicated that it was positive. 6% indicated that it was mixed as an experience, 8% it was neutral, and only 5% said that they had a negative experience with collaboration. And these are some of the many outcomes that we noticed that came out of collaboration or collaborative experiences in the DEPP. So I think there's about 20 here, and it's because many of the collaborations in the DEPP were established for different reasons. There are many different reasons for collaborating. You can see here, I've lumped the positive and the negative experiences in one place. So all of these orange lines, these are all the positive outcomes, and the negative ones are in red. Almost half of the stories indicated that their collaboration contributed to improved programming. So this was as a result of just increased innovation, getting ideas from their partner, and drawing on the expertise of their partner to inform programming, helping them just get a wider variety of opinions and input and feedback. And that was shown to increase the quality of programming overall. Another high thing, which was really positive, was improved capacity of local partners. A lot of people thought that establishing collaborations contributed to the improved capacity of local partners. Many of these stories that were to do with this were actually submitted by people in country who are working for local and national organizations. And the reason for the improvement was not only because capacity building activities were delivered through these collaborative structures, but also just the collaborative networks and relationships that were built in general helped to improve local capacity, because these networks help partners to have a louder voice. They help them to access international humanitarian forums and have a voice at those places. And they also increase the likelihood of access to donor funding, which is interesting. Collaborations also resulted in improved reach and increased networks, unsurprisingly. A lot of learning and sharing of expertise, some improved organizational and individual capacity, and then a little bit lesser, but still noted repeatedly, value for money, less duplication, and also some time saved. And finally, this one here, where it's 7% better response, I just wanted to highlight that because the DEPP is not a response program, it's a preparedness program. We don't do response under our deliverables. So it was really interesting to note that some of the collaborative structures that are being created under the DEPP are actually leading to better response already, even though it's been less than 3 years since the program was established. So that was really positive that we were starting to get some stories about how these collaborations have actually led to more effective response. And then some of the negative factors, again, I've already touched on this, but it could be time consuming. So there was time lost, some delays on deliverables, disagreements on deliverables, and in a couple of instances, collaborative breakdown, which was either due to just personal relationships that didn't work or complete disagreement on deliverables, and that ended the relationship. Okay, so as I mentioned, that was a very brief summary of the survey results, but as I mentioned, the full survey results will be posted on the learning platform in a couple of weeks, so you can have a look at that then. In the meantime, does anybody have any questions? I realize I think I've taken up a little bit more time than I should have. But please let me know in the chat if you have questions, and if not, we can move on to Roz and we'll take them at the end. Okay. I think we'll just move on to Roz. And I will pull up your PowerPoint. Oh, you've got it. Great. I'll leave it to you again. Roz, can you hear me? She mentioned she was having some technical difficulties earlier, so I'm not sure. I can see her screen. Apologies, everyone. Just give us a couple of minutes while we try to get this up and running. Hi, Roz. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, but I don't think you can hear me.
I can hear you now. I've unmuted.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right, hooray.
Apologies, everyone.
Everybody.
That's fine. We'll just get started now.
Okay. I think, can you all hear me? Just confirm you can hear me now. I don't seem to any longer be able to share the screen. I had it up for a moment and now it's gone. Oh, here we are. Could somebody tell me whether you can hear me?
Yes. People are
saying you can hear me. Okay, fantastic. I'm so sorry. I don't know if it's my ineptitude, but hello, everybody. I'm Roz Tennyson from the Partnership Brokers Association. If you want to know more about it, at some point I'll put the website details in the chat box so you can get to it. So just to contextualize this a bit, Partnership Brokers Association has been working on the process of partnering for since 2003, and I've been working on the issue of partnerships since 1992. So I've really spent a lot of time looking and studying and working with and training people in this kind of partnership, particularly in the process of how to partner more effectively. And fairly recently, it sort of dawned on me that actually there seemed to have been very little attention paid to the particular challenges of partnering remotely. And off the top of my head, a kind of statistic that I kind of invented for myself based on the relationships I'd had with various partnerships, it seemed to me that a very, very high proportion of the partnerships that we're all involved with are in fact highly remote in their character. It doesn't mean people never meet, but it means a great deal of the work is conducted remotely. And when I had this thought, I thought, well, what is different about partnerships that are essentially conducted remotely as opposed to partnerships that are essentially conducted face-to-face? And we set up a project called the Remote Partnering Project. There's another website for that, which I'll also tell you about, really just to explore and examine what the impact was of working remotely and how it was, it might be offering very different challenges. The kind of feedback we got, put very simply, was things like people saying, well, when we have meetings remotely, it tends to gravitate very, very quickly to business meetings as regards to the project, and not to really focus on deepening and building the partnership, etc. So there was something about the factor of remoteness that actually rather mitigated against the partnership having many layers or being complex or exploring challenges, etc., etc. It tended to revert rather quickly to a kind of management process. Of course, the work we've done has been to try to make partnerships more layered, more ambitious, more coherent than that. So the working definition as part of this remote partnering project that we developed was, because there wasn't one, we described remote partnering as referring to groups of people working together from different entities as part of a structured collaborative relationship. They share a common social or environmental purpose and are accountable to each other, but they largely work from distance across different locations, cultures and time zones rather than face-to-face. So that was our ongoing definition. There are different viewpoints about remote partnering. Some people see it, and I think Elizabeth already kind of hinted at this, some people see it as just an enormous burden, actually inhibiting partnerships. Other people see it as potentially very exciting. I think it's the potentially very exciting bit we need to work on, and some people think it isn't any different. So the kind of comments we had that sort of say remote partnering is a nightmare or is challenging. It can't ever substitute for face-to-face partnering. It's always better if you can look people in the eye. It's often very frustrating and inadequate, and we tend to miss out on the critical side conversations. A lot of people comment on how much happens, and I think that's reflected in Elizabeth's comment about relationships, that it's much easier to build deeper relationships face-to-face than remotely, unless you really work at it very intentionally. On the other side, very few people, it has to be said, because I think most people haven't given it that much thought, say there is real potential here. And one of the real potentials is that perhaps working remotely, if it was really well managed, could be a leveler and could take away some of the power dynamics. I'm interested that power didn't come up in Elizabeth's analysis earlier, but we find very, very often that people see power dynamics as a great inhibitor of partnerships. And when people talk about trying to build equity or trying to share power, that possibly working remotely, where people have to have more autonomy and have to be trustful of each other and respectful of each other doing things on their own, might be a way of leveling power dynamics. It may give opportunities to people to work in very different ways. We have quite an interesting concept about introverts and extroverts, and it's possible that introverts work better remotely than extroverts, and that they can contribute to partnerships because they like to have time on their own, they like to reflect, and they like to build things slowly and then share them, rather than the cut and thrust of being in the middle of a conversation. And somebody or several people have said maybe this is the only way to so-called shift the power, which is quite a kind of way of speaking. But there is a group who think that it's exactly the same as partnering face-to-face, and why single it out and why make it different? And I think that's a perfectly legitimate question. So what we did in relation to is a subset of the Remote Partnering Project, which is quite an ambitious project that is eventually going to lead to an online qualification in remote partnering, a certificate for people to get qualified by studying remotely or working to get the qualification remotely. That's a kind of bigger program, but as a subset of this program, because Action Against Hunger, who are working with DEPP, and the learning team were part of the remote partnering group of partners, we decided to create a little sort of subset, which we're just launching now, which is called Defying Distance. So trying to really be quite punchy, and provide an online toolbox giving guidelines, support and ideas for those working remotely. So really trying to headline up what it takes to work remotely. And the starting point was these objectives. So we wanted to help manage collaboration processes more effectively, and we put more boldly, in other words, trying to make a virtue out of remoteness rather than just see it as second best. We wanted to use this as a vehicle for questioning conventional unhelpful practices, because quite a lot of this work does need to cut through and transform some of the limitations of the systems and the ways of working that we have at the moment, particularly in terms of collaboration. We were keen to try and develop a way of working remotely that became more penetrating in assessing what's really needed. We do have quite a strong focus on context, specificity of context. Our kind of working hypothesis is that the process of partnering can be quite global, but that the partnerships and the projects the partnerships produce are very, very contextual. So in a way, even in our toolbox, we wanted the tools to be almost like prompts for questions as opposed to how to do it, sort of formulas how to do it, which we think are not helpful and actually don't really work. We wanted to share new approaches and emerging knowledge. So this is very, very ongoing. It's very at the cutting edge, I think. And we don't know what we don't know. So this is very much an iterative process. And we try to design a defined distance toolbox with that in mind. This is a broad outline of the structure. So when you go to the website is definedistance.org. It's very new. You'll see that all the way through it's asking for feedback. We will keep updating it. We'll keep changing it. But basically, there's a reflective section at the top, which is really almost like some key thought essays, just to try and be a little bit more penetrating. So talking about getting beneath, in other words, what and why. We call it the what and why prompt sheet, just trying to animate and question and drill beneath the surface so that one's really trying to deepen the whole value add, collaborative advantage, to use Elizabeth's phrase, more. The getting better, well, we could all do better. And the key tool there is whether we can be self-assessing in our own critique of our capacity to partner. That could be us as the intermediaries, or it could be our partners, and whether this sort of internal question about what could we do differently, how could we strengthen our capacity to partner better, etc. And then getting beyond sort of somehow what is the bigger picture, what are we hoping for, and can this partnership get us to a much bigger ambition with many more outputs, many more value adds, so that it's not just delivering projects, it's also influencing policy, or it's also changing institutional systems or whatever. So can we see ourselves as helping to lead change? And so it's called the Lead and Change Checklist. Then the tools, so those are all more reflective. They're more asking practitioners, giving practitioners opportunities to be more self-reflective and more driving in their clarity of purpose, etc. The tools are a little bit more practical. And we've tried to do things, we tried to build the tools out of the kinds of things we were getting back from the learning managers and from the project managers in the DEPP program. So the DEPP program participants of the DEPP program have been very influential in this. And again, just to keep saying, this is not fixed. This is something we will change and evolve as we go. So the tools have a certain characteristic. If you look at them, they are kind of more guidelines and questions and opportunities for reflection than they're directive. So leave you hopefully in your own time to have a look at that, and then to give us feedback about what's useful, what isn't, what's missing, what should be there. Perhaps the one that is most important is the one that isn't yet there, which is the one under building connectedness, technologies for long distance working. And that's because, well, we haven't quite figured out whether this should be an enormous list of the possible technologies available, which doesn't seem terribly helpful, or whether we could spend a bit more time analysing which technologies work best in what kinds of circumstances, and how does a phone technology, a phone app, work better than a webinar, etc. We just need to do more work on that, and so we haven't published something that we think still needs more thinking. So we're trying to create a vision. The whole bigger remote partnering project is really trying to headline up and create a real passion for and understanding of and driving force behind the remote element of so many people's partnerships. And this was a co-created definition from a workshop that we had in January, which several DEPP people participated in, and actually had Sangha people participated in. So I just read it because I think it's trying to show a kind of level of ambition that is quite important, which is, in an effective remote partnering system, partners get beyond the disadvantages and explore new ways of working together long distance that gives space for understanding each other's constraints, incredibly important, and building opportunities for innovation and breakthrough. I would also say, and this is not to be just a comment rather than criticism of what Liz presented so far, but I think quite often in partnership, the bipolar, was it successful or not successful, was it a failure, was it a success, is not always helpful, because it's so context specific, and sometimes a small step that to others might look like inadequate is a vast step for that particular context. So trying to find new ways of talking about partnering and collaboration that doesn't put things into a kind of box of success or failure, but is about emergent practice and emergent understanding, I think is part of this. Remote partnerships operate in a principled way through giving and receiving feedback, exploring how to work well together, and being prepared to challenge and change. Diversity and distance become productive. Separation gives time for individual reflection, imagination, and reframing that leads to new insights and collective action. within the partnership, each partner can work at their own pace according to their own capabilities while focusing on the needs of their communities and supporting the needs of others. So this is where we think it might well be about shifting power or contribute to the shifting power. Sharing this common thread of connectedness and consciousness, each partner feels genuinely empowered to weave an original story embedded within the local culture, history and environment that enables themselves and their community to evolve context-appropriate ways of doing new things, trying to get away from the tendency towards kind of linear humanitarian system that we all know needs to shift. So I think I've mentioned all this before, so I won't go through it again. It's part of this bigger remote partnering project. And that probably is all I have to say by way of introduction and overview. I'm very conscious of time. So very happy to get chat from people. While I'm picking up chats, I will put in these various websites. Elizabeth, over to you to...
Oh, sure. Yes. So please, if anyone has comments or questions about anything so far, please type it in the chat and we will address it. And do have a look at the Defying Distance. Well, actually, all of the links that Roz is putting in the chat right now, but the Defying Distance one has all of the tools that she's just mentioned, and they're really interesting. So go have a look. I'm just saying thanks right now. So maybe
yeah, okay. I mean, that's lovely to get the thanks. I would warmly, shall I put my own email in there? Because if anybody wants to just look at it and then send me an email, I would be deliriously happy to hear from you, because having looked quickly at the participant list, I think I know almost no one on the list. So it'd be really very nice to make a connection and to get your feedback once you've had a chance to look at the site.
Yeah, that would be great. So please do reach out to Roz. And I think maybe while or before Alex is doing his presentation, if everyone could kind of think of maybe some of their experiences that perhaps relate to things that they've been hearing about that you could share at the end, because I think we might have a space of about 10 minutes at the end where we can have a bit of a discussion. And you don't have to unmute yourself and speak, but you can also just put it into the chat and we'll pick it up. But for now, Alex, is it okay if we move on to you in your presentation?
Yes, absolutely. I'll just set up now.
Great.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen now and hear me clearly. My name is Alex Farrington. I'm the Partnerships and Projects Manager at the Humanitarian Leadership Academy. And today I'm going to talk to you a bit about how the Academy collaborates to turn humanitarian knowledge and experience into learning opportunities. So this is something that I hope will be of interest given the sheer amount of knowledge that the DEPP has amassed over the past few years. And please do chip in with any questions along the way. I'm happy to take some at the end as well. So the mission of the Academy is to enable people around the world to prepare for and respond to crises in their own countries, something that is obviously very aligned with the objectives of the DEPP project. We achieve this through a network of academy centres and learning centres which operate around the world. We currently have presence with academy centres in Kenya, Philippines, Bangladesh and the Middle East, with a centre in Indonesia to set up next year, and then West Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean in 2019. Who we work with, you can see here there's a lot of organisations. We are not a large organisation, we will never be a large organisation, and in order to achieve our ambition, we need to collaborate with others. So this is just a snapshot of some of those that we're partnering with, we recently did a kind of a partnership audit, and we're currently working with over 80 organisations, which is quite a lot for such a small organisation, and I hope demonstrates the importance we place behind collaboration. So in addition to our academy centres and our learning centre platforms, we also run a learning management system, an online platform called Kaya, which I hope some of you might have already heard of. So we work with our partners to share, create and contextualise learning for the humanitarian sector and beyond. So whereas we recognise our primary audience are those in the humanitarian and development sectors, increasingly the private sector, academia, technology companies are getting increasingly involved in humanitarian response. So we want to make sure that we are reaching a wide range of people. So Kaya hosts a series of aggregated and curated courses that cover lots of different topics that a learner might need. This covers both technical subjects, professional skills, or both, and are themed for different roles or geographies and needs. The idea behind Kaya is that we help learners focus on what they want to achieve and quickly direct them to the type of learning that will support them. So if you haven't already, I would encourage you please to sign up and check out. It's a free platform, and there's over 300 live courses at the moment that you can access. I'll share a link to the Kaya platform in the chat shortly. So the Academy isn't just about online learning, and we support the development of various kinds of different learning methodologies, again, ensuring that we're meeting the specific needs of our target audiences, and those include some of those that are on the screen now. We still create face-to-face facilitation guides and toolkits, MOOCs, which are massive open online courses, which are usually timed courses over a number of weeks, which has a mix of self-guided learning and facilitator-led or group-led learning. We also do webinars, set up communities of practice, and we're also doing a lot of work looking into certification and accreditation of learning. So, to talk then specifically around how we're collaborating to create learning, we're building significant expertise in working with others to create locally relevant learning opportunities, and then a real focus on how do we help that opportunity reach scale and reach others that it might not normally reach. So a lot of this will involve taking existing learning and knowledge resources and turning them into more interactive and online programs. Sometimes we do this bilaterally with an organization, other times we do it more multilaterally. And the Transforming Surge Capacity is a great project of where we've worked through one of our academy centers in the Philippines, working with the Transforming Surge Capacity project to create a learning pathway at the local level, which was then made available on Kaya. So this pathway included specific Transforming Surge Capacity info that the project felt people needed to know pre-deployment, as well as then aggregating additional learning programs around it. So things like the core humanitarian standard, information on learning design and facilitation, and other information on the general humanitarian sector to help give people more of a rounded experience. So this is a good example of how we're trying to work in a local to global way, as well as global to local, helping other countries learn from the specific findings of Transforming Surge in the Philippines and seeing how that might be relevant for other countries. So it's a way that we're increasingly trying to operate at the Academy, which is take learning from a specific region, see how it might need to be contextualized for perhaps the same challenge, but in a completely different context. A second case study that I was going to discuss is around a current piece of learning that we're creating on wellness and resilience. So what model do we follow when we are creating learning? And I'll try and explain that in a bit more detail. So we would always start off with trying to gather our evidence. So to understand if there's a clear need or a gap for a particular learning opportunity. And we take this evidence quite seriously. We do a lot of research and scoping and needs assessments in all of the regions that we work in to ensure that we are identifying the right target audiences and the specific needs of those target audiences. And that's always the point that we start from. Once we've identified the need, we would always seek to then bring together three things: content, subject matter expertise, and co-investment. So in many cases, there will be a lot of content already out there. We don't believe in reinventing the wheel, and we have a mantra which is to aggregate first and to build last. So we'd always seek to find out first what learning already exists. What we find very often is that there's a lot of great knowledge out there in the world, but it's not necessarily already in a way that can help people easily access that learning. So it might be a 20-page report or a PDF file, which, whereas that may be accessible for some, For others, it might be quite a different story, harder to interpret, particularly if it's not in their first language. So we would seek to first find out where that aggregated content might lie, and then try and reach out to partners who have specific subject matter expertise, who can really help define the learning objectives, really understand who the demand for this product would come from, and to form an advisory group to help develop that curriculum. We also look to try and find co-investment from partners, and we feel this is a great way to get buy-in from organisations and feel some ownership over a learning opportunity. So in this project, developing the Wellness and Resilience programme, we have 14 partners involved in that, which is an awful lot of organisations to be involved in creating one piece of learning. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that are implicit in this model a little bit later. But this is where we see there's a really important role for the Academy. And the role we've been playing is really around convening or facilitating this product development, working very closely with organisations that have aggregated content, ensuring that we have the right sharing agreements in place, that we can utilise that knowledge or learning in the new product, that we are engaging with the right partners to make sure that we've got a broad range of subject matter expertise from the global and local level, so that we are trying to create products that have universal appeal as much as possible. And also working very closely then with instructional designers and e-learning developers who are responsible for then building out those learning programs into interactive learning opportunities. So one of the reasons that we involve so many partners in a project like this, it's really twofold. One is because it will drive demand for that product. So if you have a lot of organizations involved and have a lot of ownership over a product, they are more likely to promote that within their organization and ensure that people are accessing the opportunity. But it also really ensures that a learning opportunity is balanced and really useful to a wide range of audiences. And this kind of convening and facilitation role is something that we are increasingly looking to provide as part of our external offer to organizations who may not have experience in these kind of areas. So we speak to a lot of organizations who have some really great knowledge, some really great insight into a particular issue or a country, but not necessarily the know-how or the bandwidth to turn that into an interactive learning opportunity to share it more broadly. In terms of other challenges, obviously working in this way is a very timely process. It takes a lot longer when you have 14 organizations involved in decision making. There's also issues around the buy-in and ownership to ensure that if you do get 14 people, that they actually are then actively engaged rather than sitting on the sidelines. So we do a lot of work at the beginning to ensure that partners really understand the expectations and write really clear terms of reference to explain what is the expectation on each person. There's also a lot of resource required from within our organization as well. We really have to make sure that we balance that to ensure that we're not all getting sucked into every single project. Another challenge is the cost. So when we're creating interactive e-learning, there's quite a high cost attached to that because of the fairly heavy costs that are associated with instructional design and e-learning development. We recognize this is a challenge for a lot of organizations, and one of the things that we're trying to do at the moment is investing in technology that will help create a rapid authoring tool that will support partners, especially those that don't have experience in creating learning, to quite easily turn knowledge and know-how into simple to use e-learning programs. So I guess the question is, why do we do this? We really feel that this is a model that has a lot of merit. We've seen a lot of uptake of courses that we've developed in partnership with others. We feel that people really have buy-in and ownership over these courses, and less of the kind of protectionism that often exists in the sector when people create learning purely for their staff that is then not applicable to others. And all of this really feeds towards our kind of approach towards democratizing access to learning. So looking at the sector collectively to see how it can come together more regularly in order to work together to meet some of these challenges together, to share resource, to share investments in order to create something that can be for the global good. That was the end of my presentation ahead of any discussion or questions, but I will just quickly skip to the final slide, which is to talk about a learning opportunity that we have in the near future. It's a MOOC, a massive open online course on humanitarian essentials. So this has been a learning pathway that was developed last year that we feel is a really great snapshot of the humanitarian sector that is essential for all people working in the sector. This is a MOOC that is completely free to sign up for. It's over a 4-week period, starting on the 16th of October, that we developed with a partner, the International Training Centre of the International Labour Organization. And yeah, this is modular in nature. Each week will build on the previous one, and there's lots of facilitation and expert input along the way, allowing you to connect with other learners who are undertaking the program with you, as well as there being individual self-guided elements as well. Please do check out Kaya and sign up for that if it's something you'd be interested in. And I will also circulate later our current learning pipeline, so you have an idea of some of the programs we're currently developing that we'll be releasing over the next few months. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, back over to you, Elizabeth.
Great, thanks very much, Alex. That was really interesting. I think that you have a question in the chat. Can you enroll for the MOOC through Coursera?
Okay, thank you. No, so our MOOCs at the moment only run through the Kaya platform. So we are exploring how in the future we might work with larger, more academic platforms like Coursera. But at the moment, it's something that we are piloting, delivering MOOCs through our own platform. So you can sign up to that through Kaya, and I will paste the link now into the chat function so that you can go in and sign up for free if you're interested in that or any of our other courses.
Fantastic, thanks. So while you're all thinking of questions for Alex or for Roz, I'm just going to answer the question submitted by Asmat to me, which is about how I didn't mention any hindrances in terms of competition among organizations. And he said something that was really interesting, which is, I personally feel that the big players of collaboration, that for the big players, collaboration is not difficult just because of different terminologies and languages. Rather, it's not sharing enough information with perceived competitors to maintain their competitive advantage, which is fascinating. And it's interesting, like it didn't really come up in the analysis of the stories that were submitted to the DEPP, and I have an idea of why. So it's because people within the DEPP the projects have set budgets, their partners have set budgets. There's not a lot of competition for funds, and that's because it's a preparedness program. It's not competing for response funds necessarily. And really within the DEPP, there has been just a very open environment of sharing and not being particularly competitive. I did hear that in the beginning of the program, there was a little bit more competition between projects specifically in terms of people wanting their project to be better than the others or more successful. But that kind of faded. And I think it is really because of the consortia arrangements and just the collaborative nature of these projects. You don't necessarily feel like you are only working for your organization. You feel like you're working for the project, and you feel like you're working for the DEPP, and the goals and the things that you want to achieve are wider than your organization. It might be different if it was competing for response funding or other donor funds, but because there are set funds available, I didn't perceive any competition. No. Okay, Alex has got loads of questions, so I think, would you like to read through them? Oh no, you've answered them.
You had a question from Aloysius.
Okay, Lucia, so the context of each country varies.
He said, how to deal or address the issue of language?
Sorry. Okay, so how do you deal with or address the issue of language? Is there need for support with the local nationals who are not familiar with the global language? I'm not sure if this is a question for me or if this is a question for Alex.
I think it sounds like a sort of general question, because he's followed it up, but with the context of each country varies, even in the humanitarian context.
Right.
And then he said, how does the Academy deal with it?
Alex, do you have a question, sorry, a response to the language question?
Sorry, I'm struggling to keep up on which one is which. Which one are we on now?
So there's, how do you deal with the question of language? And I think the context of each country varying?
Yes, really great question. And so something I didn't really go into too much is why our network of academic centres exist. And it's for precisely that. We know there's lots of great content in English. It's a huge barrier for most humanitarians around the world to access that. So our academy centres exist to contextualise, that includes translation, that content, so that it is more regionally appropriate for different groups. So our academy centres are doing lots and lots of translation work, but also looking at specific examples or case studies within that learning to make them also more relevant. So the Kaya platform itself, so the text in the platform operates in English, French, and Arabic, but we can host courses in any language at all. So we're already translating courses in Bangladesh into Bengali. We're translating lots of content this year into Arabic, which we know is a massive, massive gap in the sector. And it's one of the first things that we look at when we do our needs assessments of each country is how do people access learning? Is there locally available learning in local languages? And if not, what are some of the key gaps that we should start looking at translating and contextualizing first? So whereas most of the content at the moment on Kaya is in English, we're on a bit of a mission for that to rapidly change over the next year.
Great, thanks. You're getting loads of questions. So there's one from Helen, which is, how is the local participation in your platform and e-learning? Do you have any good examples which show how you manage to have more participation from the field, like the local level?
Yeah, so we have on Kaya, there is a page for each of our academy centres. So the vision is that as our academy centres begin to build more partnerships and begin to develop more locally relevant learning, that is hosted specifically on a certain page. So when you log into Kaya, you can let Kaya know your location, and it will direct you to learning that is perhaps more appropriate and in a relevant language. We're working with lots of partners in all of our centres to develop e-learning. We're working with a number of partners in East Africa at the moment, including academic partners, Makerere University in Uganda, Ardhi University in Tanzania, as well as with the Red Cross, Red Crescent societies, to contextualize learning. So one of the projects we're doing with Makerere University in Uganda is taking more global humanitarian and disaster risk reduction and management learning and contextualizing that specifically for the East Africa context. One of the things that we'll be doing next year is taking that a step further. So looking at, once you have a regionally relevant piece of learning on, say, disaster risk reduction and management, how can you start to add on additional chunks of learning around cross-border crisis, for example, or drought, so that we can start making them even more relevant for specific audiences that will help humanitarians in the field.
Great, thanks, Alex. I think you're also getting some logistical questions. I wonder if you could put your email into the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to take any follow-ups, and I'll have a scroll through all of these afterwards, and I can write some responses if that would be helpful.
Great, thanks. That would be helpful. And I know it's 11, but if anyone can hold on for 2 minutes, I wonder if Helen, if you could maybe unmute yourself and talk a little bit about your experience with the Defying Distance toolbox, because you and Roz have been having an interesting chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Liz. I was just sharing my experience in terms of working partners in the field with practitioners. There are some kind of limitations, challenges of, using these online platforms, remote partnership, tools that we have been using. So I was just making a point to Rose, like it will be really good for us to think of, alternative mechanisms and thinking of different means that we can engage more locals. So it could differ from context to context. So one system may not work for all, so it will really be very important to think of different alternatives to work on this remote partnership. And it's very important for our work, I think, in the current system, in the current humanitarian interventions. Everybody is working in this kind of system, so it's really important and of good value. So it would be helpful to get also inputs from everyone in the call, and we are also sharing this to our partners in the ground on how we can make it more interactive and engaging, because it has to be interesting and engaging, and people have to be confident to use it and share learnings and be part of different discussions that are going on. Yeah, so the issue of context and thinking of different mechanisms to involve so many actors. Great, thank you.
Thanks, Helen. And there was a question from Roz. Will it help with power dynamics? Roz, do you want to elaborate on that? I can unmute you.
So that's the question, because you were just asked a question from Aliotis about power dynamics, and in every bit of partnership work I've ever done over 25 years, power dynamics always comes back as the key issue that needs to be addressed. And power dynamics is a huge issue, and not just linear and not just status orientated. It can come from many places. But if one believes that collaboration needs to build equity and that there is a horizontal accountability, or that ideally there should be a horizontal accountability, whatever the vertical accountability, obviously there are vertical reporting lines, but in the best partnerships there is strong horizontal accountability where every partner has a voice and every partner has a right to have a point of view. And this can be really quite challenging to develop, but actually leads to much more rich and much more meaningful partnerships. So I'm just wondering, I was very interested by Alex's making the learning so accessible, and obviously it's very much to be welcomed. And I'm just hoping that our modest collaborative toolbox is designed to really build equity, and thereby to build the voice of people in the field who literally have equitable inputs into what is happening and what is not happening. And so my question really was to Helen. I know it's early days and Helen's input was really helpful and I'm sure very accurate, is whether we can really consciously design these approaches to be consciously sharing power at a very rich level, not just kind of an add-on, but a fundamental shift in how things are co-created, how things are reported, how things are evaluated, how the context is made explicit, how the people who usually feel that they're receiving end of everything actually get to shape and direct how things evolve in the future. So I mean, I'm sure our toolbox is a very modest contribution to that, and we can't be over ambitious, but I think we need to be ambitious in intention. Anyway, long answer, sorry.
No, definitely, that's really interesting. And I hope we can see in the coming months, if people pick it up and use it, whether there is some feedback on if that's changed the power dynamics at all. Helen says the toolbox will help. There was a question for me about power dynamics, and you mentioned it, Roz, as well. Sorry, I'm keeping people. You can drop off if you'd like, but if you want to listen, that's fine. So about power dynamics in my analysis, yeah, there was a little, and it kind of it came under different headings. So one was about support from leadership or support from higher ups. That was really critical, and that can often just make or break a collaboration. You could have a lot of people who are sort of lower down the chain in an organization who are very enthusiastic about a project and about a collaboration. But if your CEO or head of department isn't buying into it, then it's likely that it won't happen. In terms of power dynamics with local and national actors, there were a couple of stories of how when networks had been developed, between local and national actors at that level, people were very positive and just very thankful. And they said, this didn't exist before. We didn't have this voice, and we didn't have this forum to discuss issues amongst ourselves and to talk amongst ourselves. And now collectively we can work together, and we are much more visible because of that. We are visible to donors, we're visible to INGOs, and having that there has been really helpful. And there were just a few stories that were like that, but that's something that we've been seeing a lot in the DEPP. And I'm sure there are still issues with power dynamics even within our program, but I think for the most part, most projects have really tried to give the ownership of their project to people in country and to people at the working for local or national NGOs or at the community level as well. Well, that's what I have to say on that. I think, and Roz, leaders taking an appropriate lead is super important, but my view is that leaders in the hierarchical sense need to evolve a style of facilitative leadership, not directive leadership. Need not, and yeah, I agree. Okay, so we've run over by about 6 minutes and people are leaving, so I think maybe we should end it there. It was a very interesting discussion at the end. But thank you to Roz and to Alex and for everybody who's asked questions and contributed. That was very interesting. And just so you know, the recording for this will be posted on our learning platform. And next week's webinar will be on, actually, what should,
it's on identifying and packaging learning.
It's on identifying and packaging learning, which should be really useful. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.